My husband signed away my property to another woman, his lover. The words still echoed in my head the night I found out, like a curse I couldn't shake off. For years, I believed our marriage was built on love, respect, and loyalty. I worked side by side with him, supporting him when he had nothing, sacrificing my own dreams to make sure he could chase his. And when we finally built a life together, I thought we were unstoppable. But I was wrong. The man I trusted more than anyone else was planning to strip me of everything I owned and hand it to another woman. It started with whispers, the kind of small doubts that creep into your heart late at night. My husband, Richard, had been spending more time away from home, taking mysterious business trips, answering phone calls in hushed tones, coming home smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't mine. I told myself I was imagining things, that after 20 years of marriage, he would never betray me. But my instincts told me otherwise. One evening, while he was in the shower, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. I never went through his phone before. I respected his privacy, but that night, something inside me snapped. I opened the message, and my heart sank. "Can't wait for the day we live in that house together," the text read, followed by a heart emoji. My hands trembled as I scrolled through. There were dozens of messages, long conversations, late-night plans, promises of a future together. And in those messages, I discovered something far worse than just an affair. He had promised her my house. The house I had inherited from my parents, the one I had sworn to protect, the one that carried generations of memories. He had convinced her that he would take care of the paperwork soon, and then it would belong to her. I nearly dropped the phone, ball rising in my throat. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. The next day, I began digging. While Richard left for another one of his meetings, I searched through his study. And there it was, a set of documents tucked away in a folder, already prepared, with his signature at the bottom. It was a property transfer document. He had forged my consent, scribbled my initials, and made it look as though I had willingly signed away my property to his lover, a woman named Claire. My own husband had used my trust to betray me in the worst way possible. I remember sitting at the desk, staring at the papers, shaking uncontrollably. My entire body felt numb. I had given this man everything: my youth, my love, my sacrifices, and this was how he repaid me. By plotting with another woman to rob me of the only thing that truly belonged to me. That night, I didn't confront him. I couldn't. I played the part of the perfect wife, serving dinner, smiling weakly when he asked about my day. But inside, I was already planning. If he thought I was weak, he was wrong. If he thought he could betray me and get away with it, he would regret it. Over the next week, I secretly met with a lawyer, showing him the documents I had found. He looked at me with shock and pity, but assured me that forged consent would never hold up in court. "You have more power than you think," he told me. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. But I wanted more than just legal justice. I wanted him to feel the same humiliation, the same pain he had made me feel. So I waited. I collected every piece of evidence: his texts, his emails, the forged documents, even recordings of his secret phone calls when he thought I wasn't listening. I kept my silence, biding my time, watching him dig his own grave. And then, one evening, I followed him. He had told me he was going to a late-night meeting, but I knew better. I trailed his car to a quiet restaurant on the edge of town, where he sat at a candlelit table with her Claire. They looked so comfortable, so smug, laughing as if they had already won. And as I stood outside, watching them through the glass, my heart hardened. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to destroy them. I was not just going to expose them. I was going to destroy them. Saying it out loud in my head made the coldness inside me spread like ice. It was not enough that he had chosen another woman, or that he had lied for months. He had used my name to steal my legacy, the house my parents had left me, the place where my mother had taught me to bake bread, and my father had mended things with his big, clumsy hands. He had turned those memories into paperwork and handed them to Claire like a gift he had earned. I would not let him walk away with that. The first step was containment. If he had already signed the papers, if he had forged my consent, then deeds and signatures mattered. But so did timing. If I confronted him without legal protection, He could rush the transfer, change titles, move cash, vanish. I needed an order from the court, something that would freeze the transaction and stop the bank from doing anything else. I needed a paper that said no one could touch the house, no transfers, no sales, until a judge had seen the evidence. I called the lawyer I had met the week before. His name was Thomas, and he had a softness in his eyes that made me trust him instantly. I walked into his office holding the folder of documents like a shield. We sat at his dark wooden table and he read, his fingers tracing the signatures I already knew by heart. Then he looked up with the face of a man who had seen worse and said something that warmed the cold place in my chest. "We can stop this," he said. "Not permanently yet, but enough to buy you time. An emergency injunction, a temporary restraining order, and a criminal complaint for forgery and conspiracy." He explained the steps in plain terms. We file the injunction, the court freezes the property, the title company puts a hold on any transfers. We notify the bank. They place a temporary block on transactions tied to the fraudulent account. We hand the police the evidence. And while the legal wheels grind, we build the other half of the plan. Because law alone would not make him feel the shame I wanted him to feel. Law would take the house out of his hands, but it would not show everyone what he had done. I wanted the town to know. I wanted his friends, his colleagues, the people he drank with on Fridays, to see him exposed as someone who had betrayed his wife and sold her birthright. Thomas asked if I wanted to go public. The thought sickened me and exhilarated me at the same time. Public meant humiliation for him, yes, but it also meant collateral damage to our family name. I paused, thinking of my elderly neighbor who watched their garden from the porch, of my sister who still called me on Sundays, of the grandchildren who would one day visit. I could ruin more people than Richard. So I said no to a press release, yes to a careful legal strategy, and yes to a sting that would show the truth to those who mattered. While Thomas filed the injunction, I turned detective. I had already seen the messages, but I needed proof beyond a signed paper. I needed hard evidence of the conspiracy, of the exchange of promises, of Claire being the beneficiary of my husband's betrayal. So I hired a private investigator. I told him to be discreet, not sensational, and to find anything that tied Claire and Richard together in a way that corroborated the documents I held. He was a man named Peter, gray at the temples and pragmatic in his questions. He asked me for a list, then disappeared into my life like a shadow. Peter found patterns I had not seen. Claire was not just a woman he had been meeting at restaurants. She had taken trips that coincided with cash withdrawals. Her bank records showed deposits just days after my account had been emptied, and there were emails, a string of them, promising Claire a future in the house. Peter set up surveillance on Claire and on Richard. He had cameras in places a spouse could not place without being noticed. He tracked meetings, followed cars, recorded conversations when the law allowed. It was not pretty to watch. There are things you never want to see your husband do on camera. But when the footage began to gather, a pattern emerged like a slow, hateful sunrise. Claire arrived at restaurants with envelopes tucked away. She met Richard in quiet corners with phones turned down and hands hidden. She dropped cash into the hands of a middleman once, then laughed like the world belonged to her. The recordings were not only emotional betrayal. They were business deals, executed quietly and documented. One night Peter called me with a voice that sounded relieved and tired. He had something. A recording of a meeting in a private room at the edge of town. Richard and Claire talked numbers. They laughed about my obliviousness. He said the transfer would be final next week, that all signatures were in place, that she would finally move in. In the background, a man's voice said something about smoothing things with a forged consent and to make sure no loose ends remained. The voice was not mine, but the implication was clear. With Peter's evidence and my folder of forged documents, Thomas filed the injunction. The judge signed it within 48 hours. Suddenly, the property was frozen. The title company put a stop on transfers, the bank halted related transactions, and the county recorder placed a notice that the deed was under dispute. I felt a small flicker of triumph, but I kept it to myself. Legal victory was only the first part of the plan. It protected the house for now, but it did not punish Richard for the degradation of trust. It did not make him feel the public shame that had hummed inside my head like a craving. So I turned to the other half of my plan. If he was going to be humiliated, he would be humiliated by people who believed him, by the very circle he used as a compass. I started with the friends he relied on for praise, the men from his fishing club, the women from the garden circle, the niece who always texted him photos of her dog. I did not email threats or stage a spectacle. I invited instead, quietly, one by one, to an event I would call a house blessing. I told them it was a small gathering to celebrate the house that had been in the family for generations, the house I wanted to pass on, a calm, neighborly thing. They said yes, because who refuses a blessing for a house that stands for continuity for family? Meanwhile, I arranged something else. I had Thomas draft affidavits. I asked the private investigator to compile a succinct file showing the meetings, the recordings, the cash exchanges, the forged signatures. I had the title company prepare a notarized statement showing the transfer attempt. Every piece was assembled like bones on a table, bare and clear. I would present these to a select group of people, not as a courtroom spectacle, but as a domestic unveiling, the slow lifting of a curtain to reveal the ugliness behind the stage. Let them watch him with their own eyes, I thought. Let them hear the recordings. Let his own voice prove his guilt. The week before the gathering, I watched Richard more closely than ever. He grew cockier, confident that deals were closing. He talked to friends about plans with Claire, about renovations she wanted, about how he would finally retire to the guest room and let her have the master. He brought up transformation and legacy in the same breath, as if what he had done was noble, as if he had the right to reassign my life to someone else. I let him go on. His arrogance fed my plan. The day arrived with bright weather and a sky that seemed to laugh. I had cooked all morning, the house smelling like lemon and rosemary, the scent of home I had protected my whole life. Neighbors drifted in with casseroles and smiles, hugging me with a warmth that felt like a shield. Richard stood in his suit, the color of entitlement, greeting people with hands that had been busy removing his promises from my life. Claire arrived late, dripping with new clothes and a confidence that made my skin crawl. She smiled at everyone like she belonged. She did not know what was coming. We sat, we drank iced tea, we laughed about small things, and I kept my face calm while my heart beat a drum of impending justice. The time came when I stood to say a few words. I spoke about memory, about a house that holds the echo of laughter and lessons, about stewardship and responsibility. I did not accuse. I simply reminded everyone that some treasures are worth protecting. Then I asked Thomas to join me. He stood, looking unremarkable in a gray suit, but when he began to speak, his voice held the authority of a courtroom. He explained that there was a legal dispute, that a claim had been filed, that the property was under injunction. A hush fell over the faces around me. The neighbor who watered her roses stopped mid-conversation. The niece's dog whined and stopped barking. I watched Richard's face narrow, his mouth a thin line. He had been ready for legal paperwork, but not for a public unveiling, not with people who trusted him there to see him explained as he was. Thomas unfolded a small tablet and pressed play. The recording began with Richard's voice, blatant and casual, and then Claire's, cooing about futures and address labels, about paint colors and whom to call. The room filled with a sound that felt like betrayal amplified. Heads turned toward Richard, smiles dying slowly into confusion, then into anger. People I had known for decades blinked as if waking from a pleasant dream with a bitter aftertaste. Claire's face went white as she realized people were listening. She stammered at first, then tried to claim it was a misunderstanding. Richard's fingers trembled, his self-assured calm cracking. He tried to laugh it off as a joke, a plan never meant to be real, but his voice was too small. Peter then played the footage he had taken of Claire taking an envelope from a middleman, and of Richard counting cash, his hands shaking with greed. The room watched the evidence like a slow, tragic film. That was the moment when the personal became public. The men from his club who nodded at his Monday morning stories looked at him with new caution. A cousin who had always asked for favors now asked pointed questions about his integrity. A friend who had been planning to recommend him for a board position put a hand to his mouth, stunned. I watched the respect drain from the room like water from a leaky bucket. I could have stopped then, closed the curtains, called it a day, and let the law take its course. Instead, I stepped forward with the final piece. I pulled the forged documents from my bag and laid them on the table. I pointed to the signatures I had once thought I could never prove false. Thomas explained how another signature had been fabricated and how handwriting experts would confirm it. Then I asked the neighbor Paula to read one line from the forged transfer out loud, a line that gave the house away. Paula read, her voice steady but soft, and the sound of those words hanging in the air was like a sentence being passed. People murmured. Someone whispered, "I never would have thought." Another voice said it cannot be true. Richard's face had gone the color of old paper. Claire, who had tried to smile through it all, suddenly looked alarmed. She realized, perhaps better than anyone, that her access to my house was now an illusion. Later, after the room emptied and the guests had gone home with new knowledge that would seed gossip for weeks, Richard stood in the empty kitchen and said the one thing I had been waiting to hear. He tried to make a joke, the kind of small humor that used to break tension. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw fear there, naked and bright. "Do you still love me?" he asked, his voice small. The question had no right in his mouth anymore. I answered not with anger, but with calm, with the cold steel of someone who had watched a life unravel and had chosen to rebuild. I said, "I love the man I thought you were." He did not know how to answer that. He could only look away, which is what cowards do when they are stripped of their masks. The injunction held. The title company froze the transfer. The county recorder flagged the deed for investigation. The police came the next week not with handcuffs, but with requests for interviews. Richard hired lawyers and tried to spin tales about misunderstanding and affection. Claire attempted to claim she had been promised improvements, not ownership. But in the quiet after the gathering, the proof spoke for itself. The recordings, the cash trail, the forged documents, and the witness accounts created a wall that law could not easily ignore. When the town had a chance to whisper, it did. Rumors traveled faster than the law could move. But that was not my doing. I had wanted the truth known to those who mattered, to those whose respect had once been a part of my life. They now had the choice to step away or to stand with me. Many did. Some did not. I learned faces that day, names that would matter, and the cold distance that true betrayal creates. At night I sat in the living room, looking at the photographs on the mantel, the ones with birthdays and beach trips, and I let the paper weight of the legal injunction settle in my lap like a strange relief. I had used the law and a carefully planned reveal to stop the theft, to make him face what he had done, and to reclaim the narrative of my family. But there was more to do. Trust that had been broken does not fix with a court order. It is rebuilt slowly, with new walls, with new locks, with decisions that mark the end of one life and the beginning of another. And somewhere in the quiet, in the click of the locks at night, and the smell of lemon from the tablecloth, I felt the first stirrings of something like freedom. I had not only protected the house, I had shown him that the woman he thought she could discard was still very much alive and very much able to fight back. The next steps would be harder, the courtroom uglier, and the conversations longer. But the most dangerous part of his plan had already been stopped, and that was worth everything I had risked. I was not finished, but for now, the house was mine to keep.